Hello everyone and welcome to July's session of Dr. Spotfire. Today we will be doing improving the appearance of text areas with HTML and CSS, and it is going to be presented by Julie, our customer. So just a reminder about TIBCO now. We did amazing session in Chicago, and the next session will be in London on September 25th and 26th. So don't miss out. This is our crew of Dr. Spotfire, as always, same crew. And I'm broadcasting from Boston, but our main feature session by Julie is going to be broadcasted from Whitefish, Montana. I want to remind everyone that we shorten our Dr. Spotfire to only show feature session, and we were thinking how to fill up that gap so our users will get quick tips and tricks videos. And we are excited to launch Dr. Spotfire quick tips videos where it's a good initiative by Neil, who started the first video. If you see custom map background and live layers in Spotfire, we are thinking that we will share short videos of the work we are doing every week, so our customer will get something new hopefully each week. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go and subscribe to Spotfire, or you can save this playlist on YouTube so you will get notified when new videos get added. On community, we haven't created any new page or something, but on this customer orientation page, whenever we decide where we are going to put these videos on community, you will surely get a link on this orientation page. So without further ado, today's guest speaker is Julie Sebi. She's our customer and Spotfire expert from SM Energy. She's in analytics for oil and gas for last 15 years. And to take a full advantage of her knowledge and expertise, today's session will be little bit longer, probably 45 to 40 minutes. So if you guys are busy and going to drop at 30-minute mark, don't worry. As always, we will be recording the session and we will post this session on demand for 1 month, and after that it will be on YouTube after 30 days. So Julie, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you for joining. My name is Julie Sebi, and I'll be giving an introduction to HTML and CSS for Spotfire users. This presentation is geared towards people who have never written HTML or CSS before, but would like to get started in learning. So in today's presentation, I'm going to explain what CSS and HTML are and how they fit in with the other coding languages used in Spotfire. I'll also show you some examples of common problems people run into when using the text editor, as well as a few examples of more sophisticated text areas so that you can see why it's a good idea to learn HTML and CSS. Then we'll cover basic terminology and concepts to establish a basis of knowledge so that you guys will be well prepared to take the next steps in learning after this presentation. So before I get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I've worked in oil and gas for 15 years with Shell, WPX, SM Energy, and Ruth's AI. I'm currently part of the SM Energy Advanced Analytics and Emerging Technology team, and I focus on delivering Spotfire and Alteryx solutions to all areas of our business. And many of you might know my work from the Ruth's AI Data Shop Talk blog or through my own website, Big Mountain Analytics, where I've been writing about Spotfire and analytics subjects for the last 3 years. And outside of business hours, I mountain bike and I ski. And as mentioned, I live in Whitefish, Montana, which is just kind of right up along the Canadian border, about 60 miles from Canada. So I have a few slides for this presentation, but not many. Most of our time is going to be spent in Spotfire demos. And so with that, I wanted to get started with a DXP that shows some problems that I ran into early on. So when I was working for Roost AI, I built a lot of Spotfire templates, and this is one that I created after I learned a bit of HTML to show people where the text area can be problematic. And so here you can see I was trying to insert an image into a series of instructions, i.e. an ordered list. And in this first screenshot, I couldn't get the image to appear just below the number without it either renumbering or counting the image as a number. Instead, this is what I wanted, where the image just sits below my number and then I can continue with my list. I couldn't actually accomplish this with the editor. I had to edit the HTML itself. And then let's go to this one. So a really common mistake that people make with Spotfire text areas is trying to copy and paste from Word. That never goes well. And so in this page, I was working on building a Spotfire training, and I had done my work in Word, and I was trying to copy and paste it into a text area. And the result was inconsistent indents and formatting. And no matter what I did with the edit text area controls, I just couldn't get the indents right. And so again, I had to modify my HTML. And in this page, again, I'm working on building training examples for Spotfire calculations. And you can see I had some problems with my bullet formats not being consistent. And if I scroll down a little bit, this was just a nightmare. I think I was trying to actually delete these bullets, but the editor was just adding more of them, or it was doing something equally nonsensical. And the editor just didn't work, and I had to learn a little bit of HTML in order to fix my lists. And then in my problem page number 4, I was trying to change the color of expressions just to kind of break it up a little bit. And as you can see, I had problems with the formatting and the coloring of the bullets. And there was nothing I could do with that editor to get it to work correctly. And then in my final example, I was working with images, and I wanted the words to wrap around the image, but without HTML, just using the editor, if I kept typing, it was just going to push this image down. And instead, I wanted it to kind of float or to wrap around the image, which you can't do with the editor. You have to do it with HTML. And so now that we're done with all of the bad examples, I want to move on to a few sophisticated examples of what you can do with, I'll just call it high-powered HTML and CSS. And so my first example is going to be what is called an accordion. And this is a text area, and I've used HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript to create this accordion effect where you can expand and contract and really take advantage of the most real estate possible in a text area. And then my second example is a collapsible side menu. And this is a template that I actually purchased from a company called DataViz-Resources on the Roost AI Exchange. And so here's their web address down here. They actually have a really good blog as well. And with this collapsible side menu, I have these little images, and I can hover and use filters and controls, but then when I move off of it, it doesn't take up as much real estate. So it's kind of fun. And then my last example of the sophisticated examples is this one right here. This is CSS that is being used to change page tab colors, which is something that I know a lot of Spotfire users want to be able to do. And Spotfire doesn't offer this functionality out of the box like Excel does. This is a very simple thing in Excel, and you can do it in Spotfire. You just need a little bit of HTML and CSS. So now that you have seen a few examples of where the editor can be problematic and what good examples look like, I want to concisely summarize why you should learn HTML or CSS. After all, Iron, Python, and R are very popular right now. We all kind of have limited time to spend learning new things, so why should you learn HTML and CSS? Well, with HTML and CSS, you have access to everything that can be formatted in Spotfire, far more than you can format with the text area GUI or even with the themes. You can actually format more with CSS. You can also access all of the fonts available in Google font families. Secondly, the edit toolbar in the text area is pretty much always going to limit what you can do. It's going to limit your functionality, and as I demonstrated, it doesn't always work properly. And then finally, of all the languages that you can learn to use in Spotfire, HTML and CSS are really the easiest to learn, and you can make a whole lot of progress and really improve your text areas in a very short period of time that'll make your DXPs look much more professional. And in my experience, if you're using Spotfire for management reporting of any kind or presenting to managers or management, it's almost an unwritten expectation that it needs to be professional, clean, and well, not just clean, but really good looking. You can't just do something simple. It needs to have a little bit of pop to it. And while you can do a decent job with the text area, it takes HTML and CSS to do an amazing job. And so that's why I think it's well worth your time to learn HTML and CSS to really step it up. So now let's move into learning about HTML and CSS. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the standard markup language for building web apps and websites. And the markup part of that is referring really to the carets that start and end the HTML tags. And you can honestly think of your DXP pages as little mini web pages. Now, CSS is a language that you use to describe the style of an HTML document. It describes how HTML elements are supposed to be displayed. And as it relates to the other languages used in the text areas, so think of HTML as describing your content. For example, your content is a header or a paragraph or a list. And CSS is how you apply the formatting and the styles in an efficient way. Your JavaScript is going to be used to interact with the content. So for example, if you have a range filter or an item filter in your text area, you can use JavaScript to scroll through those filters so that you have an animated visualization. jQuery can also be used in text areas, and it's essentially a JavaScript library so that you can code less and get more out of it. And then lastly, Iron Python is the last language that you'll see applied in the text areas, and it allows you to interact with elements of the application. And interaction is often triggered by items in the text area, like property controls or buttons. So with that said, I have two small caveats. First is that your administrator must turn off HTML sanitation. This is a screenshot from the administration manager, and if you've never seen this, it's probably because you don't have access to it. But unless this is set to false, a lot of what you might try to write isn't going to get a result. So this has to be set to false. And then lastly, make sure to always test your HTML, CSS, jQuery, and JavaScript with every upgrade. There can and has been a lot of changes in these areas with upgrades, so it's a best practice to always test that code before it happens. Okay, almost out of slides, I promise. So for HTML, what I'm going to cover is the concepts of HTML elements and tags. I'll talk about attributes and how they relate to tags. And then we'll talk about blocks and lists, since those are really important to understand as you're trying to build aesthetic text areas. CSS is going to take up most of our time, but HTML is going to take up most of our time. but I'll also explain the syntax for CSS and how it incorporates. And so now the rest of my demo is going to take place in Spotfire. Okay, so first we're going to talk about HTML elements and tags. Your HTML element is everything from the start tag, such as H1 here, to the end tag. And the tag is what is between the carets, like H1 and P and body. And your end tag is always going to be denoted by a backslash. And so generally speaking, the tag is describing the content that is between your tags. And so as you can see in my first very simple block of HTML, I've used the H1 tag and the paragraph tag. And there are a couple different things that you should know about working with tags. First is that your case does not matter. I personally prefer writing HTML in lowercase, but if you use the editor and then inspect your HTML, you'll see that it's all in uppercase. But for me, and I think most people, reading in uppercase is kind of painful. And then secondly, spacing doesn't matter. If you're used to writing Python or IronPython where your indents can make or break your code, it's not the same in HTML. I found that if I put tabs or spaces in my code, it does make it easier to read, and I'll show you examples. Now, most HTML elements consist of a start tag and an end tag, but there are a handful of them, like the BR tag and the HR tag, which are line breaks that don't have an end tag. And in some cases, like with the paragraph tag, you can get away with leaving off or forgetting your end tag, but it's a best practice to always use start and end tags. Eventually, that will cause problems for you, so start and end. And then lastly, your HTML elements can be nested. You can have elements within elements. And so I have a few examples. These are tags that are just good to practice with and get started with HTML. They're simple and easy to use. You can see the results right away. So headers have 6 different levels of header tags, 1 through 6. And in this example, I've used 1, 2, 4, and 6. And you can see that the script is larger with the smaller number, and they get progressively smaller. I've put line breaks in here, but because the line breaks are occurring around a header, it's a really big break. You wouldn't see as big of a break if for the paragraph tag or other tags. The A tag is how you input links. And you can see I'm using the A tag, and I have, this is what's called an attribute to specify the link. But if you clicked on this, it would go to my website. B and strong or used for bold. If we were building websites, B and strong would have different connotations, just like I and EM would have different connotations. But in Spotfire, you can use just whichever one you're most comfortable with. U for underline, and then the mark tag will let you highlight. And I like to use this pre tag, which stands for pre-formatted text. I use that anytime I'm trying to exhibit code or expressions. And then subscript and superscript. And these are really good just to practice and get used to, honestly, just get used to hitting that caret key, because you'll be doing that a lot. And so lastly, I just want to mention that not all tags are supported or recognized in Spotfire. If you ever put something in there and you don't see a result, it's probably because it's not supported. And so now that we understand the concept of tags, let's go on to talk about attributes. So attributes provide additional information about the HTML elements, and in a way, they help you add to the HTML element. And here's what you need to know about them. All HTML elements or tags can have attributes. As I just said, they're providing additional information about an element. And some attributes can be used across multiple elements. Align, A-L-I-G-N, as I've shown here, this is an example of an attribute that you can use across multiple elements. You can use align for headers, for paragraphs, for divs, but there are others that may be unique to a tag, and that's something you'll just have to learn over time. They're always going to be specified in the start tag, and the syntax is going to be a name-value pair. Name equals value, and your value is going to be in single or double quotes. You can add multiple attributes to a single tag, and when you do that, you'll separate them with a space or a semicolon. And you might hear or have already noticed that in many cases I'm saying this or this. And it really is, you can do it one way or another. It's not necessarily as hard and fast as some other languages might be. And as I mentioned, not all tags are supported in Spotfire. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so in the first example, I'm using the font tag with the size attribute to change the size of the font. And take note, my font tag starts here at the top of my text area. And I also have another attribute that I'm using down here for just one line. This is that courier face right here. And so I end the courier face at the end of this line, but then my font size doesn't end until farther down, several lines farther down, really at the start of my images. And because I have ended it, you'll notice that this line of text is smaller. It's in the default font size. In the second line, I've used the align attribute in order to center my paragraph. I've actually done that in all of them. And I'm using the face attribute for the font tag to change the font. And then if you keep looking farther down at my images, I have used the width and the height attribute to modify my Tibco Spotfire image. Now, I put the images in here twice to show you that there are two different ways that you can specify the width and the height. If you enter just the numbers, it'll work, and the application will know that that means pixels, or you can specify the pixels. Just note that if you're only doing the numbers, it needs to be in quotes. Now, there are a lot of attributes out there that you can use for different HTML tags, and this is really just meant to be an introduction to the concept of attributes so that you can go out on the internet and search for tags and attributes that you would want to use. And I'm not going to talk much more about attributes because I'm sure you've noticed a lot of my examples are related to formatting, which I said we would be doing with CSS. That's true, and we're going to talk more about that. I just wanted to introduce the concept. Now, we're not ready for CSS just yet. I want to talk about lists and blocks before we get to CSS. So I use lists in Spotfire all the time, and I had a lot of trouble with the text editor and getting the level of the list to be what I wanted it to be. And so this is a brief summary of the syntax for lists and how to create them. So you have ordered lists and unordered lists. Ordered being letters and numbers, unordered being bullets. You will use the OL tag and the UL tag for this. And so you will use that tag to denote that you're starting a list. And then you have to also use what's called the LI tag in order to actually enter a line into the list. And when you want to indent another level, you just add another OL or UL. And to come back out, you will just end the OL or the UL. You can mix ordered and unordered lists, and you can also use attributes to change the type or the format. So let's take a look at an example. So I'm just using the H2 header 2 to kind of name out what I'm doing. I'm creating my grocery list. I've made the font a little bit bigger. And now I use the OL tag to start my list. But note, I have to actually enter a line in the list with the li tag. And it's really important that you end the li, because if you don't, your list is going to get messy. And then when I want to indent, I just do another OL, and then I continue on my list. And you'll notice here that I've used spaces in order to help kind of keep track of my levels. And if I were going to put another level in here, I would do another OL, and I would probably start at, 1, 2, 3, probably round about here. And when I'm ready to end the list, you just end that tag and it comes back. And everything kind of repeats. And you'll also notice that I have closed my original OL tag at the very end, and I've closed my font tag at the very end. So the default when you're using an ordered list is 2 numbers. But if I go into my second example, you'll see that I've changed them to letters by using the type attribute. And so you can change this to Roman numerals or anything else that you would like. Just take note that I have specified that type in each level of the list. And just to demonstrate that mixing, I'll put in a UL and show you that you can mix ordered and unordered lists. So then for my unordered list, it looks pretty much exactly the same. I'm starting with the UL tag. Each line starts and ends with LI. I use another UL tag when I want to move in. And so it's a very straightforward and easy to learn syntax. The only thing I want to note is that if you're researching lists online, you'll find attributes to help change the bullets to different styles. And I've had trouble getting these to work in Spotfire, which is why I don't have any examples here with square bullets or bullets of other styles. I'm guessing that they're not supported, or possibly I just haven't found the right attribute yet. So lastly, in our HTML discussion, I wanted to talk about blocks. I felt like I would be leaving something out of this if I didn't talk about blocks or containers. And it's important to learn about these because every HTML element has a default way of displaying the block, kind of depending on what tag you're using. And most are going to default to what are called block or inline. And whether it's block or inline is going to determine how much space a particular tag takes up in the text area. And so you guys have already seen me use the p tag and the div tag. The span tag is another one that's also an option for holding HTML content. And so your block level elements are always going to start on a new line and take up the full width of whatever is available. And so I'm using a div and a paragraph. And if I were to modify this, it's always going to take up the same amount of space, no matter what. Whereas your inline elements, like the spans, do not start on a new line and only take up as much width as necessary. And so here you can see that I've actually entered in 3 different span containers, and this is what it looks like. They're just back to back. And also, just for fun, you can see I've started to use a style attribute, and I'm customizing the padding, the border radius, and the background color. And so just to show that that padding, if I make it smaller, now there's less around the words. Or the border radius is going to affect the curve of this container. So if I take that, now my edges are not as rounded, or now they will be very rounded, very rounded. So that brings us to the end of HTML, and I'm going to talk about CSS for just a little bit before I wrap up. So let's go to CSS. And as a reminder, CSS describes the format or appearance of HTML elements, or think of it as specifying how the elements should be displayed. Now this might be a little bit confusing because, as I've shown you, it is possible to specify formatting with HTML tags. So what happened was that HTML was not really intended to be used for formatting. It was created to describe the content. But somewhere around HTML 3.2, all these font and formatting tags were created, and all of a sudden HTML got long, efficient, and super, super messy. And you can kind of think of it as just one giant mistake in coding history. And eventually a bunch of developers fixed it with the creation of CSS in order to format much more efficiently. And the examples I'm going to show you will demonstrate that efficiency. And so there's 3 ways to add CSS to HTML. One is in what's called an external style sheet, where you actually have a separate CSS file. And that's really more applicable for building web pages, not working in Spotfire projects. So if you ever read about it on the internet, just kind of file it away. You don't really need to know about it. We will use the next 2 methods, which are referred to as an internal style sheet and inline style. So your inline style, you're using a style attribute, and then you are specifying the name value pairs in CSS. Or you can use an inline style tag, where you have the style tag and then you write some CSS, again, your name value pairs in between the tag, and that works as well. So I'm going to talk about when you would use one versus the other. Let's see here. But before I do that, I just want to show you one other thing first. So here I have 2 images, and I have used both HTML, excuse me, I'm going to drink water real quick. Okay, so I've used HTML in the top line, and I've used CSS in the bottom line in order to specify the height and the width. So this is using HTML with attributes, and this is using the style attribute with CSS. And I just wanted to show you that you can do the exact same thing with both of them. And I wanted to point this out simply because if you don't understand the difference between HTML and CSS, then whenever you're looking up examples on the internet, it's going to be a little confusing. So that's why I point this out. Now, either one will work in Spotfire, and you'll probably develop a preference, and honestly, it's going to be whichever one you happen to memorize first, and that's okay. They both work. So now let's look at a style attribute example. So this is going to really highlight what I mean by CSS being more efficient. And let's see. So let me look at my HTML here. And so this is 2 inline style examples to show you what you can do. Both examples are using a div container. One is coloring the font white, aligning it in the center, bolding the font, and then adding a background color of slate blue. The second is also center aligned. It adds some padding and sets a different background color as well as the border radius. And there's really just so much that you can do with styles that it's actually kind of hard to choose really good examples. And so, so I just kind of wanted to show you more or less what the form and the format looks like. And I would also maybe want to put some spaces in here, just make it a little bit easier to read, and it will still work. Now, I do want to point something out about colors here. You'll see that I have specified slate blue in the top, and then here I've used a color code. So let's talk about colors. So colors can be specified either with the standard color names, which is what slate blue is. Oh, and I just saw I had a question. I'll come back to the questions. So you can create colors with the standard names, or you can use different color values. And at the end, one of the references that I'll give you is to W3 Schools, and they have a really great tutorial and list of all the colors. So I just wanted to point that out. So now let's go look at the style tag attribute. So here you can see I have some information that's colored and formatted differently about 3 different wells. And if we look at the HTML, you can see that what I've done is I've created 2 different formatting styles, one called Wells 1 and the other called Wells 2. And really they only differ in the background color. And so that formatting is housed between the 2 style tags, my start and my end tag. But then farther down where I actually have the Wells information and where I want to apply this formatting, I've placed the content in a div container, and I've used the class attribute to say this container should be formatted how Wells 1 is specified. And so this is reusable, and it's a lot more efficient than using those HTML tags. And I really like this method. So before I wrap up on CSS, I want to talk very briefly about when you would use these 2 different methods. So when would you use inline versus internal style sheet? So I use this style attribute in any text area where I think it might be helpful. I use it all over the place if I'm just kind of free-form coding. But I stop using that method when I know that I'm going to want to reuse code. And so I'll reuse code in examples like my last one where I want to format multiple HTML elements differently. And I think I want to do that in several places. Secondly, I will use the internal style sheet to create a cohesive style for an entire DXP. Now, I've popped over to a new page and I have a lot going on here. But if I open up this HTML block right here, you'll see that what I'm doing here is specifying formatting for a ton of stuff in the application. And so this, for example, right here, this is formatting my buttons. And so if I change the width of my buttons, now that gets updated. And so I could easily copy and paste this code and use it throughout my DXP. And this is really where things start to open up within the application, because you certainly can't, with just the HTML editor, you would have to format each and every button one at a time, which is mind-numbingly painful. And you can also format things that you can't even format with the themes. And so I just wanted to demonstrate that. So I'm going to highlight some code over here in this one. And I'm going to add it. And what you're going to see is this font change. And that changes that font. That's not a big deal. You can change fonts with themes. But I'm also going to add in, let's do SFPC bottom. And what that's going to change is the font on this guy, on my selector. And now this updates. And if I were to use SFPC left, it would update this. And so that's how you can think of your DXP as a bit of a website. And everything within the application has a piece of code or a syntax behind it that you can format. And so this is, and the way that you would apply this within your own project is you would create this style and you would copy and paste it, and then you would put it into a text area in each one and only one text area in each page in your DXP. And then you've created a cohesive style. I say one and only one. I mean, really, you could put HTML in any text area, but if you ever need to modify it, it's nice to modify it in only one place. So now we don't have time for me to cover how to figure out what everything is called. So for example, how do you know that SFC-value-cell is the syntax that's required to change the cell values? There is a very easy way to figure that out, and what I'm going to do to follow up on this presentation is over the next week or so, I'm going to be putting up one or more blog posts that show you how to inspect these elements to figure out this syntax. So you can either follow or connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can just go to the blog and look for these new posts. So in kind of a wrap up, I just have one slide here with a few other resources, and I'm not going to punch it. I'm not going to put this in PowerPoint mode because I actually want to go over to my browser. So if you want to learn more, you can check out my blog, which is Big Mountain Analytics, and I'll just pull that up real quick. And this is my website. This is the blog. And if you scroll down, I've categorized everything that I've written about. And I started this, I want to say, only a couple months ago, back in March. So I'm every week building out my content. And you won't see any HTML or CSS in here yet. But when I create that blog post next week, there will be HTML and CSS here. Or if you go up to Data Shop Talk posts, this is a list of all of the posts I ever wrote for Data Shop Talk. And if you scroll down, you'll find all of my posts on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, including this introductory series that you might really like to start with. Other resources that are great, W3 Schools has tutorials for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I can't say enough good things about them. That website is amazing. Almost everything I know, I learned on that website. And then the Roost AI blog is called Data Shop Talk. And specifically for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the Spotfire developer blog is another great resource. So check those out. I hope you found today's topic interesting and useful. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or there's my LinkedIn address right there. I'm happy to connect with anybody. And I hope you enjoyed it. You'll see 1 to 2 articles from me a week on the website. And I think
Thank you very much, Julie.
Oh, there's some questions in Spanish. No, where do you find the complete list for properties of the elements? Yep. So here was the first question, and I can't actually read that. I'm so proud of myself. This is what I'm going to cover in the blog post. And I'll do that next week. Okay, take it away.
Cool. Thank you, Julie. If you can stop sharing, I will share my screen. And thank you very much, Julie, for taking the time and effort to give such an informative and amazing session on HTML and CSS. So guys, next month, our own crew member from Dr. Spotfire going to present on creating driving routes in Spotfire, and that is Neil. And please check out the chat. Neil and I pasted many useful links, LinkedIn group which we created, even Julie's LinkedIn profile link where you can follow Julie, and her blog's link as well. As always, this session is recorded and will be available for on-demand page for 1 month, and then after that it will be posted on our Dr. Spotfire playlist. As always, if you face any questions, please go and post questions on community. If you want us to notify, just use hashtag Dr. Spotfire, or you can email directly to drspotfire@tipco.com. Register on community. There are amazing resources out there. And yeah, I guess that's it for this month. Thank you, everyone, and hope you guys will join next month. Have a good one. Bye-bye.